This panel is about business communities. So what we are going to discuss today is about the importance that business stakeholders play in public diplomacy. And the way we see it is in two ways. First, because business is our presentation card, they are sometimes our ambassadors in third countries, and they can project the way they can project EU values in their actions when they are acting in and operating in third countries. And also because they can be multipliers of our messages, and this is something that probably we haven't yet developed in its full potential. So that's why it's important that we're having this discussion today. We are going to be discussing then how we can integrate business stakeholders better in a Team Europe approach. And we're going to have a panel that actually integrates the perspective of business in the EU, but also business operating in China. A colleague also from DG Grow that will bring the perspective of institutionally how we support business when it comes to supply chains. And one of our ambassadors, in this case in India, a booming economy, just to see how in practice the Team Europe approach can develop in a partner country. And all of this is even more important today in a context of instability, in a moment where the EU has to become a stable partner and is seen by others as a very reliable partner. We are the good old Europe. Takes time, but we deliver, and that's why we are becoming even more attractive for our trading partners. And to give a bit the context, I wanted to give a couple of figures so that you see why the power of business communities is even more important in partner countries, and this is related to the global figures in terms of trade and investment. The EU is the largest trading bloc. We represent 16% of global trade, and this is more than the percentage represented by either the US or China. The EU is also one of the most open economies in the world. And why? Because we need all kinds of raw materials, and without them we wouldn't be able to operate. And this means that the percentage of openness in our economy, so trade, the ratio of trade in relation to GDP, in the EU is around 45%. Just to give you an indication, for the US this is 25%. So that is how open and at the same time how dependent we are of our also business communities operating in third countries. The EU is a very large export powerhouse. We actually have an export value annually which equals to 4 trillion euros a year. And these exports represent or support over 31 million jobs in the EU. So basically, 1 out of 7 jobs in the EU is connected to the outside dimension, the external dimension of our economy. And an interesting figure, I think, is that over 720,000 European companies are actually exporting outside of the EU, and 95% of this number are small and medium enterprises. So we are not on this, we are not at all like other trading partners in the world. And the last figure I wanted to share with you is that we are also the first global investor, well beyond the US and China. So that is the power that our business communities have actually in terms of public diplomacy. And now we move to the first question. So the idea is that I will be asking 2 questions to each of the panelists in 2 rounds. But first we are going to show one video that we got from two MEPs actually. So we will project one now and another one in the middle of the questions. They couldn't be here today because there is the INTA committee, so the International Trade Committee in the Parliament that is happening at the same time. So first, a video by Mr. Schwab.
As chair of the Conference of Delegation Chairs, I have had also the pleasure to get the invitation to this meeting, to this gathering, to discuss about parliamentary diplomacy. Unfortunately, I can't be with you today because I had other obligations after the Strasbourg week. But I warmly welcome you here in the European Parliament, and I hope that you will have good talks. The parliamentary diplomacy is only an addition to the general diplomacy that in the European Union is with the External Action Service. People that work there have to stay in contact, in continuous touch with our neighbors, with our diplomatic partners, to reassure them about our project, to stay in touch, to agree on interests that we have in common, and to make sure that our values are all the time the basic line, the guiding line of our policies. For the European Parliament, with its 48 national delegations, it's important to participate in this, however, because the European project is based on a strong parliamentary model, which is advising but also controlling the government, in this case the European Commission. And from that perspective, our action is there to support the European diplomacy by showing to our neighbors, to our partners all over the world, what our interests are and how diverse also our viewpoints are. But we are all united on the values of the European Union. For that reason, especially in business relation, on competitiveness, on sustainability, we have to make an outreach to countries that somehow have difficulties to understand why the European policies are sometimes led in a direction that initially has not even been proposed by the European Commission. And for our partners, it's important to understand also the personalities that drive these policies in the European Parliament. Sometimes they have very good relations to specific countries. Sometimes they have an amazing knowledge about the specific issues. And to show this variety of reflection, all bound together by our principle, united in diversity, that's the role of parliamentary diplomacy, and that's the role of the European Parliament with its Foreign Affairs Committee and also the Development Committee, but at the same time also these 48 delegations that we have that take an action in relation to specific parts of the world to be really in touch with the local politicians over there. That's a very huge issue, that's a very big task, but I can reassure you that my colleagues take this very seriously and they are committed to do their best what they can do to stay in touch with the partners. So I wish you very interesting talks. I hope that you will have good results and I hope to see you soon personally.
So this was how the Parliament did its own diplomacy. Now we move to Olivier, who is a member of the European Economic and Social Committee and also who is part of the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium. So, Olivier, from the perspective of a national member state and from the perspective of EU business, how do you support EU companies? In your case, both from your role in a Belgian federation, but also in the Economic and Social Committee, when they would like to operate in third countries?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. Just a couple of words. The FEB is a Federation of Enterprises in Belgium. As you said, we represent 40 branches coming from industry and services, and we are the Belgian member of Business Europe. Just to let you know who I am. So, indeed, good afternoon. No, indeed, we try to do a lot to support our companies. We have a rich tradition of economic diplomacy in Belgium, and I would like to elaborate a bit on these, meaning attending economic missions abroad or welcoming heads of states at the FEB. And the idea is not to play on the business-to-business dimension. We have some trade promotion agencies doing this in Belgium. We try to work on the B2G, business-to-government dimension, having our companies, our members in contact, in dialogue with foreign governments, be it, as I said, during economic missions abroad or at FEB. But we have also expectations as regards economic diplomacy. We see it as putting really the economic dimension at the heart of the diplomacy, at the heart of the global strategy of the EU. And the Team Europe plays a very important role here, combining the national embassies, the delegations of the EU abroad, first towards the third partners, coming with one message, one narrative, and here, of course, the EU must guarantee the coherence of its narrative, of its message. And by coincidence, with the Economic and Social Committee 2 weeks ago, we went to the WTO in Geneva, and honestly, we heard many critics about some unilateral EU measures like deforestation, like the CBAM, and apparently, once again, the lack of dialogue. So it's really important to have the coherence between all the policies, be it the trade policy, the external relations policy, the global gateway, international partnerships, because some partners of the EU were, to say it in this way, quite surprised by these unilateral measures and maybe the lack of coherence in the narrative. But then we also see economic diplomacy and the benefit of our companies, the Belgian and European companies, and we believe that the national embassies, the delegations working together can provide information to the European companies on the business and environment climate in the country, on cultural aspects they should be aware of before starting activities, but also information on more sensitive issues. For example, helping the companies to fulfill the new obligations linked, for example, to due diligence. As you know, due diligence in China could be seen as spying activity. So putting the European companies in a very difficult situation. If they not fulfill, they will have problems in Europe. If they try to fulfill, they could have problems in China. So we believe that the delegations, the national embassies could help the European businesses to fulfill these obligations, to make their due diligence. And the delegations and the embassies together could maybe also share some sensitive information about sanctions against member states, against the EU, against companies, coercion measures. We had these in the Baltic countries some years ago. So this is also a kind of support that the delegations and the national embassies could give to companies in an economic diplomacy culture.
Thank you. A lot of ideas for things that we could do better. Maybe we finish the first round before we do some comments. So the second speaker I have in the list is Mr. Franz Rösler, who is online because he is in Beijing. And he's the head of Advantage Austria in Beijing. Franz, what strategies are EU companies and EU business associations adopting to navigate the complexities of the current geopolitical context, and in particular in a difficult market like the one you're present now on in China?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's easy to follow up now just on my previous speaker because you already introduced some of the work what the Trade Promotion Organization does. And let me set the stage first about China. China is, of course, still an attractive market for many EU companies. For Austria, for instance, it's our fourth most important trading partner worldwide. And besides trade and investment, also nowadays, what companies have to do, they have to follow Chinese trends and innovation, as this might also be relevant for doing business in Europe as well. And that's what we actually do as Austria's official trade promotion organization, Advantage Austria, every day. What has always been, China is for Austrian companies an overseas market, of course, which has always been more complex and difficult and more expensive to work with than close-by markets. So similar, of course, also for India and the US, for instance. To enter such markets, this has to be seen as an investment into future revenues and requires investments, not only money, but also dedicated people to work with this market. So for remote markets, even more important than for other European markets or close by markets. What has changed forever, however, now, post-COVID, and also given the current geopolitical tensions between the US and China, this also affects us as Europeans, of course. It is even more difficult to predict business conditions and to plan ahead. So this has really changed. Companies must now react faster, be closer to their partners in China, and set them up more flexible to change to fast changing different situations. What we see in the field is that investors choose to come up with lighter structures. So they rent property instead of owning it. They outsource activities like warehousing and logistics to others instead of doing it themselves. And newcomers from Austria nowadays team up again with local Chinese partners, which has to be in history nearly 20 years ago, to team up with local Chinese partners also in order to understand the markets better and to act and to look more locally. So that's very important to be closer to the markets, partners again for markets like China. For a business association like ours, what we try to do every day is really now to try to promote people-to-people exchanges again. Very important are the business missions that we already mentioned, Austrian pavilions at fairs, so to get acquainted again with China, because for a long time there had been not enough contact between Europe and China. China had been closed for 3 years, for instance, for COVID, and now we all wake up to a new reality, how China has changed. We also have to get a new generation of business people interested and being fit for doing business with China. How we do that? We're offering webinars, or very important, the one-to-one consultancy. And what's very new for us is this geopolitical advice. We have to work with top managers of individual companies to give them guidance on the opportunities and risks of doing business with China, also having a global view in mind. Before, trade promotion organizations always praised their market. This is the great market, China, to be in. But nowadays, of course, we owe it to our companies to give them a correct, worldwide picture. What are the risks and opportunities to going to China, and do you have to choose a market or not? So this is what a trade promotion like ours is doing. Thanks.
Thank you, Franz, for this very interesting perspective of a very difficult market like China, but at the same time with a very big potential for the EU, because China remains one of our main trading and investment partners. So it's actually one of our main investment destinations. And despite all the difficulties and all the consequences that we are suffering now from the trade war that the US and China are engaged in, we still see that for EU business, China remains a priority. And we are working actually a lot now to try to tackle some of the difficulties that you have mentioned with a view to the EU-China summit that will take place in a month. So this is all on our agenda now. And then we move to another difficult partner, India, but with whom we're having now a much more constructive relation. Hervé, are you listening to us? No?
Yes, I am.
We cannot see you.
You cannot see me.
Ah, no. Oh, sorry. We can see you now. Yeah, we could see you in the other screen, but not in the one I have in front. Sorry. Hervé, coming to India and the importance of India now as a strategic partner, how do you see the potential of bilateral partnerships in general with regions and with partners with high economic growth rates? And in your case, how do you see that in India in particular?
Thanks very much, Sophia. And I think you already set the scene quite well in the beginning about the game and the environment in which we are at present. I mean, clearly we are facing an increasingly unstable and unpredictable landscape. So it's exacerbated by competition, confrontation, and of course less space for cooperation. And what we see is that everyone is in the business of hedging, diversifying, and de-risking, and both on the strategic level, on the economic level, and on the security level. So I think that the premium now in relationships or partnership is less driven by the absolute level of growth rates or on short-term gains, but more on what I would call the reliability, stability, and predictability. And as you said in your introductory remarks, it's interesting to see how much the market value of the EU as a strategic partner is on the uptrend, and many partners around the world, whether like-minded or not, actually are interested in developing and deepening relations with the EU. So the EU at this juncture, I think, has somehow to engage and act at two levels. I think first is how we can be more laser focused on our own interests, on our pursuing our agenda of competitiveness and security, but also stand for the rule-based order, multilateral solutions to global challenges, and how we engage partners in that respect. And the other end, I think it's about how we manage the increasing demands from partnerships, whether in the trade and economy, technology, or clean energy, and so on. So we also need to manage expectations from partners, and we cannot just be mobilized as the EU as at convenience and become a sort of the hedging commodities for others. So I think we need to engage with partners in the long game, in the long run. And I think we've seen how many partners like Canada, we heard it from my colleague Geneviève earlier on in the earlier panel, but UK, Norway, Japan, but are doubling down on their engagement with the EU, and also because of the highly polarizing strategic rivalry between the US and China, the disruptive and revisionist agenda of Russia, the instability in the Middle East. So it's all pushing the same direction. And we see it also from other partners, from ASEAN countries, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand. They are all increasingly demander in developing relations with the EU, and the same with Latin America. And so that's where I would say the relation between the EU and India fits. In a way, we see that our respective strategic interests are increasingly aligned, and we're already the largest trading bloc for India and in goods, and we are in the top 3 for services. We are one of the leading investors in India. So we are already at a large scale, but the potential still remains untapped, and we want to develop it. And so that's the reason why we're negotiating an FTA that would probably be a game changer. But it's not just about, I would say, pure trade relations. We are also investing in the so-called Trade and Technology Council. We only have 2 in the world, with the US and India. And here it's really what I would call the upscaler. It's about how we connect from the research level to innovation and bring it to scale on the market. And that mobilizes research actors on both sides, startups that can develop and engage in new technologies. Like now we are looking at the recycling of EV batteries as just as an example. But again, that's not enough, because what makes this, I will say, the value of India is the multi-layered point of engagement. We are working also on trusted supply chains in critical domains like semiconductors and clean tech. There is, of course, what the business community can bring, and we heard it from Mr. Oliver, the role of the business community, and I'm happy to develop. We just created, it was long overdue, a Federation of European Business in India, which is the kind of chambers of European chambers. And it's really indeed about B2G, it's about policy advocacy that we do, but we do it in a Team Europe fashion with the member states, and they are all mobilized, and European chambers of commerce are also fully behind. We also have a rather ambitious agenda on connectivity, Global Gateway, and the famous India, Middle East, Europe economic corridors, IMEC. And we have more and more people-to-people agenda, which is centered on mobility of skills and talents, because India has a supply especially in ITC sector, and we have needs in Europe. So how we can bring that. But let me say also in relation to the first partner, just raw and pure economics is not just that's gonna cut it. It's also how our values and interests intersect. And I think because EU and India are the two largest democracies, we also see eye to eye in many ways how we stand for a cooperative world order. The fact also that India may be not so seen and perceived from Europe, it's also very much unity in diversity. You know, in Europe, we have 27 member states and 24 official languages. In India, they have 28 states and several territories and 22 official languages. And incidentally, that brings convergence. Like, for example, when we want to develop our AI learning language models, India is exactly in the same game. And so we are trying to cooperate on that. And we engage with the state level in India. And last, public diplomacy and culture is very much part of also of this economic agenda, because it's about creating linkages, but it's all develop economic opportunities. And just very simple elements, I'll finish with that. Learning of European languages in India now is becoming fashionable because it's linked to the mobility of talents and skilled workers from India to Europe. So you see, all these levels of engagements are interwoven, and that is what somehow drives this EU-India agenda today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hervé. I think that you made the perfect link to our next speakers. You mentioned several things, in particular the link between competitiveness and security, or rather how we handle that paradox. That's a very fashionable concept now called economic security, where we are talking a lot about de-risking rather than decoupling in our case, and we're looking in particular at risks associated to our supply chains. So, Sophie, you are the head of unit in DG GROW, responsible for international value chains. How is DG GROW, how is the Commission addressing the current disruptions that we are seeing on international value chains?
Thank you very much. It's very difficult to follow this exquisite panel now as a last speaker, but indeed you said it before and we've heard it now. I think in this mandate, if there is one driving issue for our policy, it's really competitiveness. And if you also look at the key initiatives that DG GROW together with other services launched within the first 6 months of this mandate, so the Competitiveness Council, the Clean Industrial Deal, the Automotive Action Plan, the Steel and Metals Action Plan, the single market strategy, really the driver to really work on the competitiveness of our European industries. I think there couldn't be a stronger political message. And then if you look at the details, single market reinforcement and the external dimension are two sides of the same coin. Because if we want to leverage and deploy new technologies, we need a business case, we need scale, and for this we need markets. Now, what does this mean? Well, yeah, we are in a rather challenging global geo-economic context, but not only since the 21st January, but I think for us, the COVID crisis was a wake-up call, and then we had the Russian aggression against Ukraine, now the tariff situation, and just lately, a new exports regime on rare earth in China. I think we can all understand from this that the world is changing, that maybe globally trade flows are changing, and I think we have to draw 3 consequences from this. First, we need to realize that the world might not necessarily open globally, but rather close certain markets, and that it will be more difficult for us to access new markets. This is a reality that we need to be aware of and to work on. And with this, we in DG GROW, we have really started since the COVID crisis to really look at our strategic dependencies around the world. So if I just look at product scale, For example, we have more than 60 dependencies from China. We have some dependencies from Mexico. So to really have that data and granular knowledge, but then to also draw the conclusion and to say, what does this mean for our global supply chains? And because if we don't have access to rare earth, our automotive manufacturing closes down in Europe. So it can be maybe a small input into our manufacturing, but it can actually have a huge impact on our industrial capacity to be competitive. So we need to be aware where are the markets, where can we diversify into, and where can we also be more resilient within our single market. So we need to invest into our own single market to make it easier to do business. And my EVP now always says, choose Europe. So we really need to strengthen and build the business case for Europe, to invest in Europe, to do business in Europe, and to really use it as a platform to access third markets. And then the great work of DG Trade that we complement on free trade agreements and so on is that sort of business case to have that leverage and outreach into third markets. And I think one last thing that we should not be shy about, and this is maybe a message into the audience online. I think in this current environment, Europe stands for stability, and this is a high currency at the moment. You kind of know what you get. You don't always like what you get, maybe in terms of regulation or in terms of administrative procedures, or you can name it, but at least you can plan and you can do your business around it. And I think at the moment, at least this is something we shouldn't shy away in promoting when it is about Europe.
I think that is clear that we may be slower or we may have more regulations, but it's true that we have become more attractive. And I'm sure that in the message that we're going to listen to now from MEP Brando Benifei, who is one of the vice chairs in the International Trade Committee, we're going to hear also about diversification and resilience.
Dear colleagues, friends, partners, it's a great pleasure to contribute with this brief video message to the panel on business communities as part of the European Public Diplomacy Week. In a rapidly changing global landscape, the need for a united and forward-looking European presence has never been more essential. To attract investment into Europe and open new opportunities for European businesses abroad, we must act together as Team Europe. This means mobilizing our full collective strength, from member states and EU institutions to civil society, regions and cities. Only through this shared approach can we truly connect with business communities in third countries in a meaningful and impactful way. As coordinator for my political group in the International Trade Committee and chair of the delegation for relations with the United States, I see firsthand how vital our interinstitutional cooperation is in building lasting partnerships. Whether negotiating trade agreements or strengthening political dialogue, our efforts must be grounded in mutual trust and shared prosperity. One example I'd like to highlight is a new instrument in the EU trade toolbox, the so-called Clean Trade and Investment Partnerships. These tools can foster sustainable, innovation-driven investment frameworks both within Europe and with global partners, aligning trade with sustainability and democratic values. Parliament has raised concerns, however, over their vague definition of what constitutes clean, over potential risks of fragmenting existing frameworks, and from outside the EU over the possible added compliance burden on partners and businesses. That's why we must work together to ensure clarity, inclusiveness and strong coordination, so these partnerships become effective and widely embraced. As Team Europe, let's keep working hand in hand to champion open, rules-based trade and investment, and to shape a future where our businesses and the people behind them can thrive across borders. Thank you, and I wish you a productive and inspiring discussion.
So this was an inspiring message focusing on how important it is for the EU also that we operate in a rules-based order instead of a power-based order as the one that we currently have. for which we are less well equipped, and I would say both the institutions and the business. We may discuss later what are the clean trade and investment partnerships that Mr. Benifei has signaled, because it's true that this is an initiative that involves business and governments together. But I would have another question now, first to Olivier. You have replied partially in your first answer, but I would like you to go a bit more in detail and to tell us, as institutions, how can we support you better from the institution side in your internationalization efforts at this moment?
Yeah, thank you. So, as I said, the first dimension is providing information. Indeed, the world has not become easier. Many challenges have been mentioned, and our companies have to navigate in this very turbulent world. Belgium is one of the most open economies in Europe. 1 job out of 4 depends on the export. The total value of our export represents more than 85% of our GDP, so we are an open economy by definition. But still, we are an SME country, so really providing information to the economic operators is key, as I said, about the business and investment climate, new opportunities, new risks, but also more sensitive domains that I mentioned, like helping companies to make their due diligence in difficult parts of the world, or informing companies about sanctions or coercion measures. So really informing companies is key. And then a second priority, to be brief, is to keep working on the free trade agreements. We really support the free trade agreements, meaning maybe 4 topics to still, and we have also a role to play as business organizations to work on the awareness. When we look at the preferential utilization rate, we see that the free trade agreements are not yet used at their full potential. It means that some EU goods and services are too expensive on third markets, despite what has been negotiated. So awareness about the free trade agreements to the exporters and to the importers, to keep negotiating new ones, of course. And here maybe with a new approach, if it can be comprehensive, that's great. If it's more thematic, let's do it. One speaker referred to the critical raw materials, to digital trade, to regulatory cooperation, Trade and Technology Council. I think we have to open the toolbox to increase our relations with third countries. We have also to review some free trade agreements. The world has changed, so the one with South Korea, for example, could be maybe updated. And then finally, maybe to speed up the ratification procedure. Belgium is not best practice in here. CETA hasn't been ratified yet by our 7 beautiful parliaments that are involved. So I think that's really a lesson for the future. Let's consider the trade dimension of the free trade agreements as a EU-only competence, being ratified by the European Parliament and by the Council. So providing information and reinforcing and diversifying our trade relations are 2 key priorities and 2 tasks that we see for the authorities.
Maybe just to build on your last point, CETA is probably, the agreement with Canada is probably one of those agreements that was very, very controversial at the time of adoption, and where I think that the press, but also in some business organizations, were fearing that there would be a lot of negative consequences. Today, at the summit with Canada, one of the things that are going to discuss is precisely the results of a study, the ex-post evaluation that we have done on the 9 years of provisional application of the agreement with Canada. It's not ratified, but in reality, it's implemented insofar as the trade and main investment provisions are there, and the results are really positive. And there, I think that the Team Euro approach is also something that we would welcome from the institutional side, especially when it comes now to supporting the Commission in the final stages of approval of two very important agreements that are going to come up in the second semester, the agreements with Mercosur and with Mexico, for which we're going to present the proposals in the coming weeks. I would then turn to France in Beijing. So I would have a second question for you. How can we support you better in practice in a third country? So in this case, do you feel that you get the assistance and the information that you need from all those actors that are in Beijing? And actually, even coming back on the issue of information, are you aware of the existence of access to markets? Are you using it?
Of course, that's the easier question, but let me start with the first one. Let me share just some examples from my daily life as a commercial counselor here for one embassy in Beijing. So here in Beijing, under the leadership of the EU delegation in Beijing, we hold regular meetings of all the EU commercial counselors at least once a month and inform each other. So that really ensures that countries like Austria do receive the same information that is given from the Chinese side also to others. So we can compare notes, and it really shows together we are stronger. There are also ad hoc meetings for problems that might arise. It was mentioned several times now already, these new Chinese export control regulations on raw earth materials, which really affects all of us. Which is very specific. And if we all, as a team, Europe, all EU embassies together and the EU delegation together, make some statements towards the local trade ministry, MOFCOM, or if we ask for a meeting, of course, this has a much bigger impact than as if only one country is asking for such a meeting and raises the problem. Also, trade life is very complex nowadays. So recently we also had a collaboration with the Swedish embassy and the EU delegation here and together with the EU Commission's trade defense team on a very, very specific topic that affected Austrian and Swedish companies. The issue was really, really too specific for us as a small team. The Trade Commission only consists of 8 people. And the Austrian company and also our office, we benefited so much from the expertise that was brought in from Brussels from the trade defense team. So otherwise, I think we wouldn't have been so able to help this specific Austrian company. Yes, you mentioned the EU market access database for inquiries in regards to customs and import regulations. We really use it on a daily basis. Very easy to use to get some first hints, some ideas where the answer might be going, and we further on base our further results on this initial results. So that's really very recommended to any listener here in this webinar as well. Born at the time when Austria still was not a part of the European Union, I really can't imagine anymore how we could have done our work without such a Team Europe approach. So I'm very thankful for the support we get also on behalf of the Austrian companies.
I'm reminded of the time. So we would move now briefly to Hervé in Delhi. If he can tell us how he, as head of delegation, is supporting business in Delhi, and maybe the practical experience also of the establishment of the European Business Association.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks, Sofia. I mean, as mentioned by previous speakers, I mean, when at the delegation, we are more in the business of policy advocacy, trade promotion is really the business of national chambers of commerce. But obviously, there are a lot of opportunities for intersection and mutual support. And I mean, there may be a few instances here also in India where we had actually to use the EU level and bring sort of the groups of member states whose companies shared the same problem, and we did a sort of a group action and towards the authorities to get some unblocking of files, and that this will continue, and I think that's part of the job. We are also really, certainly as mentioned by Franz, that trying to bring up to speed and up to date all the member states locally. Here we have 27 member states, all the embassies are here, like in China. So it's really about informing through the working group of economic counselors, but also the group of heads of missions, what we are doing, and trying to optimize the opportunities to engage jointly the authorities, to share the lines to take, the common messages that we have on occasions to deliver. We are also increasingly, through the Federation of European Business in India, trying also to develop what we will call economic intelligence, to identify where there are opportunities for European business. And there are sometimes this economic intelligence is part of the job of chambers of commerce for specific sectors. But I think looking more at the macro level, increasingly, this is something that I think there is a joint appetite from member states to have action at the EU level. And of course, when it comes to engaging with Indian interlocutors, the Federation of Business, of Indian business, of Indian industry is also, as mentioned before, is to show the attractiveness of the European market, is also to explain, in terms of policy advocacy, but also public explanations, like CBAM. The CBAM is a very toxic policy, although we are aiming at decarbonizing. And there is also often misgivings, if not outright manipulation, on what CBAM is and what CBAM is not. So we do a lot of outreach towards Indian business communities to explain and engage and listen. And I think this is groundwork which is often not seen and perceived, but really help to bring the Indian business or India, but in other countries, I guess my colleagues in the same, because the business community of the country where we are often act as a peer pressure on their own authorities to engage with the EU. So there is a mix of the gov to gov, B to B, or sometimes to B, so the two business communities, the European and the Indian, towards the two governments. So you have this multiple dimension that play out, and I think it's really part and parcel of our work, and even more so now as at the EU level. Thank you.
I think that many of you have mentioned already CBAM, deforestation, due diligence as part of the complexities of our regulatory environments that sometimes are more difficult to project, but on which we also need the involvement of the business community sometimes, and to see also how we can defend it better vis-a-vis our third countries. Sophie, I'm reminded really of the time. A last thought that you would have on how to support business from your side.
Very quickly, I think from our side, data is really important. So I was talking about the strategic dependencies. We also do foreign direct investment tracking around the world to see where the trends are. But also you talked about the underutilization actually of some of our FTAs. And this comes down to the concrete business opportunities. It's not enough to say we want to trade in the machinery supply chain. We need to know which components this are. And actually my Director General was in India recently, and there was a point we could sell in clean tech a certain technology, but then on the other hand, we have a lack of a certain input. So these are the more granular level information we need. Second, business outreach. We actually established a network of the European business organizations. So Evie was talking about FEBI, which is the Indian partner, but of course, here it's really important for us to have the chambers of commerce linked into the European policy landscape, but they also feed us from the ground the information, also which obstacles they encounter. And then secondly, for example, if we spend Global Gateway money, if this serves our competitiveness, or maybe rather not. We also have a lot of help desks. You have the trade promotion help desk or trade defense help desk. We have SME help desks and IP help desks. We have the Europe Enterprise Network in 60 countries, to which 260,000 companies participate, mainly SMEs that we offer, and of course other stakeholder networks. So this is what we try to do. Maybe from my side, also a message again into the delegations, if I may, just having this awareness that competitiveness is important, to see where the business opportunities are is important, and we are here in case there are questions or there is need for help, for information. Thank you.
Thank you. So this was a very rich debate showing the need to continue this network, this common approach to find opportunities and to be better informed about everything that is happening outside, inside, and to project a common image and a common narrative to our partners. Thank you very much.